he is a young man that has been caught up in this, kept in solitary confinement for some 6 months, some 5,000 hours now, in conditions that were even worse than the ones that I was in. He's now held in a military brig. His visits are very limited, only once a week. And his lawyer has said that they've been getting worse and that his psychological health has been getting worse.
We're joined now by one of the few people who've been able to see Bradley Manning, his friend David House, who joins us now exclusively from Boston. Thank you very much, David, for joining us.
Thanks, John.
When was the last time you saw him?
I traveled to see Bradley at the brig in Quantico last weekend.
Mm-hmm. And describe, if you will, his physical and mental state. You're very concerned about both.
Yeah, I definitely am. I've been traveling to visit Bradley in the brig since last September, and over the several months I've been visiting him, I've noticed a remarkable decline in his psychological state and his physical well-being. In recent months, Bradley's developed very big bags under his eyes. He appears to be very weak from a lack of exercise, and psychologically, he has difficulty keeping up with some conversational topics, which never used to be the case. So I definitely...
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I definitely think the conditions he's being kept in are inhumane, and they're starting to weigh on his personality and his physical appearance to a great degree.
Well, talk more specifically about his confinement, because he's in solitary confinement, correct?
That's correct. Glenn Greenwald of Salon.com released details last week of his confinement. Pentagon spokesperson Colonel David Lapon and brig official Brian Villiard released statements refuting Greenwald's claims. They said that Bradley Manning was allowed access to newspapers, was allowed exercise in the form of calisthenics or running or basketball, and said that he wasn't restricted in the current events that he viewed. From talking to Bradley this past weekend, I discovered that these Pentagon claims in response to Greenwald's article are completely false. In fact, Bradley's only exercise is walking for 1 hour a day in chains in an empty room. He is kept in his cell for 3 hours a day, which is solitary confinement, and he is not allowed newspapers, nor has he ever been allowed newspapers or international news the entire time he's been in the brig in Quantico. So this damage control by the Pentagon, it reeks of either a misunderstanding of his confinement or outright deception.
Now, I was reading your piece about your visit with Bradley Manning, and early on in the piece, you say when you were first starting to visit him, he was reticent to talk about his confinement, the conditions he found himself in. But on this last visit, you were able to, or he was able to talk, I guess, more freely, if you will, about his condition. What's changed? Why is he talking about his conditions now as opposed to before?
Well, Bradley's a very humble fellow, so in our early conversations, he wouldn't really want to talk about himself very much. Our topics of conversation were usually on physics or computer science or philosophy. This recent visit, I kind of resolved myself before I went in that I really had to break through this and get more information about his conditions of confinement, because it was the time to do so. Just kind of by pushing, I was able to get him to open up a little bit more than he had in the past. I really should have pushed much earlier.
Now, I have to ask you this, since you're the one person one of two people, I suppose, his lawyer, who have seen him. Has he ever talked to you about Julian Assange? Have you asked him if he knows Julian Assange, if he's connected in any way with Julian Assange?
We've never mentioned any details relating to his case at all. Like I said, our conversations are usually very abstract, and I'm mostly there to give him mental engagement, some small form of mental engagement. In terms of that, no, he's never mentioned anything, but it has been stated in a recent New York Times article by Charlie Savage that the Pentagon may be treating Manning in such harsh conditions in order to get him to roll over on Assange or something like that. But we never mentioned the case, so I would have no information about that. I could only speculate.
Okay, so this might be unfair, but I'm going to ask you to speculate. Since you've spent time with him and you know him, do you think there's a connection between the two?
I could only speculate, and I think that all information about Bradley's alleged connection to WikiLeaks or to Assange flows from one very unreliable source, Adrian Lamo, who was admitted to a psychiatric clinic only 3 weeks before he came out with this story. So I think that we should really be asking ourselves if this connection exists at all.
So, last question, because we're running out of time. You know, there are laws to protect whistleblowers in the United States. Do you think Bradley Manning did anything wrong?
If the allegations against Bradley Manning are true, I think he is an ethical giant of our generation. I think that perhaps in this case, America has judged him in the press much too quickly, and that we should really reconsider why we keep alleged whistleblowers locked up in solitary confinement.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to bring it back to Julian Assange, since there seems to be a connection, or at least that's what everyone seems to believe. There's a connection between Julian Assange and Bradley Manning. Talk, if you will, about your thoughts on the other man at the center of all this, Julian Assange. Do you hold him responsible for the situation Bradley Manning finds himself in?
I think that in order to comment on that, I would have to have some information about whether Julian and Bradley actually had any relationship. And again, all information to that effect is coming out from one very unreliable source. So I don't think that's something that I can speculate on, no.
Okay, so then how about step back to the 30,000-foot level then and talk about your thoughts on what Julian Assange has done with the information that he's released via WikiLeaks.
So I think that the underlying principles of the WikiLeaks organization are actually principles that are very in line with most American ideals. The principles of open government, the principles of government transparency. At least from an abstract 30,000-foot perspective, I think the actions of WikiLeaks are very much in line with the principles of the American people.